I had sensed something was wrong long before that night, but I kept convincing myself it was just a phase. You know that feeling when you're sitting across from someone you love, someone you've shared years with, and suddenly, it's like you're strangers? That was me on Thursday night at 8:12 p.m., sitting across from my wife at the same oak dining table we bought together 6 years ago. I was clinging to something that clearly didn't want to be held anymore. The meal was warm salmon, rice, and roasted vegetables. I'd cooked it myself. I always cooked on Thursdays. She used to love that about me. She'd smile, sit on the kitchen counter, and tell me I looked sexy in an apron. But tonight, she didn't even glance at the plate. She just scrolled on her phone, the screen casting a cold glow on her face like a flashlight in the dark. She hadn't spoken a word since we sat down. I cleared my throat softly and said, "You had a long day. Just try to eat something. Anything." She didn't look up. Instead, she mumbled, still engrossed in whatever held her attention more than I did. There was something in her eyes, blink distant. Not anger, just absence. Like she was already living another life, and I was just a ghost haunting the house. I tried again, gentler this time. "Everything okay?" Finally, she set her phone down, but not to engage. She pushed the food around with her fork as if it offended her, sighed, and said, "I'm just tired." No eye contact. No affection. Just that clipped tone that cuts deeper than yelling because it's wrapped in apathy. I tried to lighten the mood. Reaching across the table, slow and cautious, like touching something fragile, I placed my hand on hers. That's when it happened. She jerked her hand back so fast, you'd think I burned her. "Don't," she snapped. I froze. She looked up then, just for a second, and her eyes weren't soft. They were cold, flat, like glass. "Don't touch me tonight," she whispered, so quiet it was like she didn't even want the words to exist between us. I didn't react. I just nodded and kept eating, pretending her words weren't tearing holes in my chest. But inside, something shattered. It wasn't just the rejection, it was the confirmation. I'd felt it for months. The distance. The way she stopped kissing me in the mornings. The way she turned to the edge of the bed at night. The way every conversation became a checklist, not a connection. And now she couldn't even stand my touch. It's humiliating when your own wife recoils from your hand like it's a burden she has to dodge. After dinner, she went to the bedroom without a glance in my direction. I sat at that table for a long time, staring at the empty chair across from me. I felt like a fool, like a man showing up to a love that had checked out long ago. I got up, washed the dishes in silence. She didn't say goodnight, didn't ask about my day, didn't care. And I couldn't sleep. So I left the house. It was nearly midnight, and I just walked, no destination, just quiet streets, flickering streetlights, the scent of cold pavement, and distant fireplaces. I passed the house with the porch swing where we used to sit in the early days, back when she'd lean on my shoulder and talk about everything and nothing. I could still hear her laugh echoing down the street. No, I couldn't even remember the last time she'd laughed with me. I walked past the cafe where we'd had our first fight and made up 2 hours later with kisses and apologies. Back then, she fought for us. Now, she wouldn't even talk. And as I walked, memories played in my mind like a sad slideshow. She used to wait by the door when I came home from work. Now, she was in bed before I even took off my shoes. She used to kiss my neck after dinner, play with my fingers, tell me I smelled good. Now, she winced if I brushed her arm. She used to whisper, "I love you," in a voice so soft it made me feel like the only man on earth. Now, the only thing she whispered was, "Don't touch me tonight." And that whisper echoed louder than any scream. I think that night, on those cold sidewalks under dim streetlights, I stopped being her husband. Not legally, emotionally. Something inside me closed. Not out of anger, but exhaustion. I was tired of begging for scraps of connection. Tired of pretending this marriage was anything more than a polite arrangement. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stopped hoping. And that's worse, because hope keeps a man trying. But when hope dies, when you know the woman sleeping next to you would rather be anywhere else, you stop fighting. You start planning your exit in silence. When I finally walked back home, the house felt colder than the night air. She was already asleep, or pretending to be. I stood in the doorway, watching her back turned to me, her hair tied up, her breathing shallow. No space left for me. No sign I even existed to her anymore. I climbed into bed without a word, facing the other way. And in my head, I whispered my own goodbye. Not out loud, not dramatically, just a quiet vow to myself. This is the last night I beg for love. Tomorrow I disappear. I didn't sleep much. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence between us. It wasn't peaceful silence. It was the kind that feels like being buried alive next to someone who doesn't even notice you're gasping for air. Around 4:30 a.m., I got out of bed quietly, careful not to wake a stranger. I stood at the foot of the bed, just looking at her. She was curled up, facing the wall, wrapped in the blanket I'd given her for our 3rd anniversary. She looked peaceful, like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't just pushed her husband one step closer to the edge the night before. And in that moment, I realized something. The woman I loved, the one who smiled when I walked through the door, who danced with me barefoot in the kitchen, who told me I made her feel safe, that woman didn't exist anymore. Maybe she changed. Maybe I did. Maybe life just wore us down. Whatever it was, this wasn't love. Not anymore. And strangely, I wasn't angry. I didn't feel rage or betrayal. Just something colder, clearer. Relief. A sad kind of freedom, like taking off a heavy coat I hadn't realized I'd been wearing for years. I walked to the closet, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small duffel bag, the one I hadn't used since our last trip to the lake, back when touching each other didn't feel forced. I packed slowly, quietly. A few shirts, jeans, my toothbrush, phone charger, wallet, passport. Just the essentials. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't panicking. I was calm, calmer than I'd been in months. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where she'd pulled her hand away from me the night before, the same table where we'd once laughed over coffee. Now it felt colder than steel. I grabbed a sticky note, wrote 4 words. Take care of yourself. No goodbye, no drama, just finality. I left it where she'd find it. Then I took one last look at the house. Every photo on the wall felt like a lie, smiling faces frozen in time, pretending love never fades. I thought about taking our wedding photo, but I didn't. I just stared at it for a second and walked out. The sun hadn't risen yet. The world was still asleep. And I walked away from the life we'd built with nothing but a small bag and a weary soul. I didn't know where I was going. I just drove, no music, no destination, just silence and road. At one point, I parked outside a 24-hour diner and stared at the steering wheel for what felt like an hour. Then I turned the car back on and kept driving. Eventually, I checked into a cheap roadside motel on the outskirts of town, $1.42 a night. It smelled like mildew and bad decisions, but the guy at the desk didn't ask questions. That was enough. The room had one lamp, one chair, and a bed that creaked if you breathed too hard. I dropped my bag, sat on the edge of the bed, and just breathed. I felt hollow, empty, but not broken. It was strange. I'd always thought leaving would be this huge, painful, dramatic thing, that I'd crumble under guilt or longing, but I didn't. What I felt was peace. Not the kind you feel when everything's perfect, but the kind you feel when you stop lying to yourself. I wasn't happy, but I was honest. And sometimes, that's the first real step towards something better. That day, I didn't answer calls or check messages. I turned my phone off and let the world spin without me. I sat in that motel room, staring at the ceiling, drinking burnt coffee from the vending machine, and thought about everything I'd given her, the patience, the sacrifices, the nights I stayed up listening to her fears, the years I carried us both when she didn't want to carry anything. And I realized she wasn't the villain in my story, but I wasn't going to be the victim anymore either. Later that night, I drove to my friend Eric's place. He had a detached garage he used as a workshop. I didn't explain much, just asked, "Mind if I crash here for a few nights?" He looked at me like he already knew. Then he nodded. "You already know the answer, man." I threw my bag on the floor, lay down on an old paint-stained sofa, and for the first time in a long time, I actually slept. No nightmares, no tossing, no waking up to silence beside a woman who wished I wasn't there. Just sleep. I didn't have a plan, no apartment lined up, no next move. Just a small bag, a worn heart, and a quiet decision to rebuild. But for the first time in years, I felt like a man again. Not because I left her, but because I finally chose myself. The first text came 3 days later. Can we talk? I saw it when I turned my phone back on. I stared at the screen, not angry, not hopeful, just numb. I didn't reply. I turned it off and slid it back into the drawer. The next day, she called 4 times. Then she called Eric. She showed up at his place unannounced 2 days later, knocking like she hadn't been the one who whispered, "Don't touch me tonight." Like I was some stray she could summon back. I watched from the garage window as Eric opened the door. She looked exhausted, dark circles, messy hair, panic in her voice. "Is he here?" she asked. Eric shook his head. "He's not ready to talk. You need to give him time." "I didn't mean it like that," she said, voice cracking. "I was just tired. I didn't think he'd actually leave." Eric didn't say much, just crossed his arms and stared. She left in tears. And for a brief moment, I felt something, not satisfaction, not victory, just clarity. She never thought I'd walk away. She thought I'd always be there, no matter how cold she got, no matter how invisible she made me feel. She was wrong. I left town 2 weeks later, moved 2 states over, rented a small apartment above a garage in a quiet neighborhood. Took a job in logistics, nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills. More importantly, nobody there knew me as her husband. I was just Jake, the new guy who kept to himself and showed up on time. I made a rule, no contact. Blocked her number, blocked her on everything. I didn't want explanations or apologies. I didn't want to be pulled back into a relationship where I had to beg to be seen. I'd spent too many years proving my worth to a woman who'd already decided I wasn't enough. Now I was proving it to myself. I joined a gym 2 blocks away. At first, I hated it, my body was out of shape, my confidence shot. But I kept going. Not for revenge, not to impress anyone, just to rebuild. Rebuild discipline. Rebuild routine. Rebuild me. I woke up at 6 a.m., worked out, showered, went to work, came home, read, walked, cooked. Slowly, the noise in my head quieted. I became less reactive, less emotional, more centered. People at work called me the calm guy, the one who never got rattled, who always seemed like he had something on his mind, but never let it show. That used to be the opposite of me. Before, I was always trying to fix everything. If she was upset, I'd drop everything to chase her emotions. If she was distant, I'd overcompensate with flowers, dinners, softness. I walked on eggshells in my own marriage, trying to hold it together while she let it fall apart. Now, I didn't chase anything. Over time, the pain turned to distance, and distance turned to indifference. I stopped thinking about her. Stopped wondering what she was doing, who she was with. She became like a song I used to love, but never played anymore, not because I hated it, but because it didn't fit who I was now. Almost exactly a year later, I ran into her. I was in the city for a work conference, grabbing coffee at a small downtown shop. I didn't see her at first, she saw me. I was waiting for my drink when I heard a soft voice behind me, Jake. I turned. She looked different, older, tired, like life had weighed on her. She wore a beige coat, hair up, makeup faded. Her eyes lit up when I looked at her, like she was both surprised and relieved. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You look." She didn't finish, just stared. I nodded. "Hey." She stepped closer. "I've been trying to find you for months. I didn't know if you were okay." "I'm good," I said, simple, calm, not cold, just honest. "You look amazing," she said, almost in disbelief. "You've changed." I smiled politely. "Yeah, I guess I have." There was a heavy pause, like she wanted to say everything or nothing. "I never stopped thinking about you," she finally said, voice trembling. "What I said that night, I didn't mean it. I was overwhelmed." I raised a hand gently. "You don't have to explain." She blinked. "I made a mistake." I nodded. We both did. She looked down, then up again, eyes glossy. "Is there any chance we could talk?" Just talk. I checked my watch. My coffee was ready. I grabbed it, looked her in the eyes one last time, and said, "You take care of yourself." Then I turned and walked out. No anger, no bitterness. Just a man who'd already said goodbye a long time ago. As I stepped into the sunlight, coffee in hand, wind brushing my face, I realized something. I didn't leave to hurt her. I left to save myself. And sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't shouting, slamming doors, or proving you were right. Sometimes, it's becoming the man you were meant to be in silence, with dignity, far away from the person who made you feel small. She lost me the moment she whispered, "Don't touch me tonight."